Good morning. How are you guys? I know nobody's on there yet, so we'll wait a few seconds for people to come in. This is Mojisola Wilson of Authentic Conversations with Moji. We're just waiting for a few people to come in. It's going to be a fun show today, I assure you. It's going to be honest, transparent, and as politically correct as I can be, because you guys know I speak power into truth with a very unique voice. Sometimes we laugh, sometimes we cry, but one thing is for sure, the conversations are always going to be authentic. Welcome. Good morning again, and I see that there's a few people on. Whoever you are, please do say hello as I bring in my guests. I thank you all so much for joining me. And let me bring in my guest in a few minutes. I decided to do this show with non-African Americans, because I did a show once before with both sides. And then I did a show with just African Americans. And I figured let's bring in non-American and non-Black American voices. I often use the word Black Americans because in my head, I have to differentiate the African American migrants and African Americans that were born here. So forgive me for not being politically correct when I say Black Americans. And then sometimes you'll hear me say African Americans. Basically, I'm using the African American label for Africans that migrated to America. Let me bring in Mike Brown, and then I'll bring in Vanessa, as well as Danny Panzella, Vanessa Velez and Danny Panzella. How are you guys? Thank you for coming on the show. Mike, would you be kind enough to introduce yourself and give the audience a little bit about yourself?
My name is Mike Brown. I'm an attorney, criminal defense attorney mainly in Connecticut. I'm married to a Nigerian woman. I have 2 children, Kennedy and Lincoln, and I'm glad to be here, and thanks for asking me to be here.
Thank you so much. Vanessa and Danny?
Hi, well, I'm Vanessa. I'm a Mexican-American living in Brooklyn. I was born and raised here, and I am married to Danny Panzella, a white man.
Hi, I'm Danny Panzella. I've been a police accountability activist for the past 10 years. So we do a lot of cop watching in New York City, but mostly in Brooklyn. I'm not as active anymore, but I still lead what I consider to be a cop watch lifestyle, which means that when I see police interactions, if I don't immediately start recording, I at least kind of hang around and kind of keep an eye and just to make sure that the police are going to behave themselves. But I'm also I've done a lot of writing about the NYPD, its racist tactics, and also its use of technology for surveillance.
Fantastic. The first question I'll ask you guys is very simple. Why did you accept the invite to come on the show today? Mike?
So, first of all, my wife asked me, and she's the boss in a lot of ways. But, I think we'll get into this more. I think a lot of, for me, I'll just speak for me personally. I'm always trying to assess if I'm doing enough to be a part of the solution and a part of moving to hopefully the next stage of what comes next. And I'm always, even though my work confronts this stuff, I'm always feeling like there's more I should be doing. I sit in my house and I enjoy my life, and I'm just always wondering if there's a next step I could take. So when an opportunity comes to maybe contribute something hopefully positive to the discussion, it's an honor and a privilege to say yes. So thank you.
Thank you. And Danny?
Well, Moji, we've known each other a long time, and you know that I have very strong opinions, and I am not shy about sharing those opinions. And I do think that this is a topic that far too many people are not willing to, they don't want to face, they don't want to engage with this topic. And the reason that we have this problem is because our society doesn't want to engage with this topic. So I feel like it's important for me to do that.
One of the reasons that racism, I think, is So out here, we already know it's because of the government that we have at the moment. So I don't even want to go that route. Because honestly, for me, I think individual activism is how we're going to get where we need to go. But that's my personal opinion. I don't know a lot about any other way, because we've tried so much. We've marched, we've burnt houses. We've This has been going on for many years, and you know, Vanessa, you are a brown person. I put it that in quotation marks. What are your views on the state of America coming from your lenses?
I think, as you stated before, the fact, or as Danny and everybody here agrees, the fact that we don't address these issues is what continues to perpetuate the issues. I mean, it goes back to the saying, what you resist persists. We don't want to look at it. We don't want to feel it. And so it continues. I experienced racism on pretty much a daily basis. And I live in New York City. It's like the melting pot of the world. And yet there's still racism even here. And I don't experience I know that I don't experience it to the level of that Black Americans or African Americans or anybody with darker skin color faces that experiences than I do. But I know it's there. And it took a long time for me to realize that I was also an activist. I didn't consider myself an activist, but I've been raised that way my whole life to kind of use my privilege. I speak English fluently, so that means I can stand up for a Mexican who doesn't speak English, or a Spanish person that doesn't understand what they're being told, or I can stand up for somebody with darker skin. There are so many levels, and we all have a responsibility to step in and do our part. And I think you're right. It does come from an individual level. We all have to look at our beliefs. We have to face those beliefs, because we all hold racist beliefs to some degree or another. And I think it's important to look at that no matter how uncomfortable it gets.
You know what's really funny is that for a long time, I, as an African American woman that's a business owner, that's been on the board of Staten Island Board of Governors as the first Black woman in 70 years. Danny, you remember that? And for me, I didn't realize how even privileged I am, even though I'm still a Black person that runs into all this, the same issues. Because when I step out the door, it doesn't matter who I am, what businesses I own, where I've been in the world. I'm still a Black person first.
Mm-hmm.
So my question is, why do we still have racism in America? And I'd like Mike to please answer that first. I mean, it's been many years and generations.
It's a big question to ask. And I mean, I think there's different ways we look at racism or talk about or think about it. And there's, the kind of personal face-to-face version of it that, it's definitely ugly when it exerts itself. And we see that, flaring up, especially with this administration. But there's also the structural institutional racism that's baked into the fabric of American society, built on white supremacy and all those things that, that's the stuff that I think people are the least willing to talk about. I mean, people can get to a place where, you have to behave a certain way around, there's certain civil discourse that people can build themselves up to get into and agree that there's, but then when you talk about what American society is built on and what white America is built on, people don't really want to go down that road, because people, I mean, there's a lot of, I can't speak for everyone. It's a very general question to ask, but I think people want to think that they're good people and that the lives they're living are based on the hard work that they accomplished and they achieved, and that the place that people are in society is because of, I think a lot of white people want to believe that the society we have is a basically fair society, because that justifies the lives that we lead. And it's scary and uncomfortable to address how deep this stuff is. So a lot of people want to shy away from a lot of those things, and we don't address those, and people are willing to say, and I mean, I think we see it in our president. I don't want to get into this too much, but on the one hand, he said some things that were actually pretty eloquent about the death that occurred in Minnesota. Yeah. But as soon as the rubber hit the road of, what this means and what we do about it, he reverted back to that same racist language that we're so familiar with him. And I think that's the disconnect is, yeah, we can call, the most obvious examples of racism, but when we really want to talk about what our society is built on, people are extremely uncomfortable with that. And I don't know the answer to that. You know what I mean? I fight on a daily basis, or, in my job, I fight for individuals that are facing that system. But I sometimes get frustrated because individual victories, to the small extent that they exist, are just one piece of this bigger system that's, pretty deeply or completely entrenched. It is America, right? So I don't know if that answers it, but that's kind of my perspective on why we still have it the way we have it. So
I appreciate that. And it's very important that it came from you, a lawyer, that works in the criminal justice system. So Danny, let's talk about George Floyd a little bit, not a lot, just a little bit. So can we? Somebody has two devices going on in the same room. Can you turn one off?
Yeah. Hold on.
Yeah, thank you so much. There you go. Now we lost you
I
altogether.
think we lost the wrong one.
So in the meantime, the event that happened on the fact is that let's talk about 3 facts. We know for a fact there's racism in America. We know for a fact that George Floyd was murdered. We know for a fact that the gentleman that was jogging a few months ago, was murdered. We already know that. In my views, and I don't know about yours, one of the things that I had to learn is that people are people. There's going to be bad people. Coming from Nigeria, where there's tribalism, where one village doesn't like the other village, and they kill each other and they abuse. It's just natural. That's just what's going to happen in society. So when we look at cases like the gentleman that was murdered, that was jogging and murdered, when we look at Eric Garner, when we look at Trayvon Martin, when we look at all of these events that happened, yes, some of them were racially driven, but personally, I think not only is it racism, I think there has to be a lot of reconstruction in the police department and retraining in the police department. Danny, I pose a question to you first, because you do a lot of policing the police, so to speak. So what is your take about the George Floyd? Let's talk about that for a minute.
Well, I think as much as I would love to pin this on the police, and obviously the police are absolutely responsible, the problem really is the greater of society. The police would not be able to get away with what they get away with if the majority of society stood up and said, this is not okay. And this is where you and I kind of had a little bit of a disagreement yesterday, where you're talking about the rioting, and I guess we'll probably get into that later, but 70% of this country is white. And because of that, they sit back and either believe the propaganda that anybody killed by police deserved it in some way. And we see that with the justifications and bringing out every time someone gets killed, anytime they got a traffic ticket is brought up, like as if somehow that justifies. Even if George Floyd forged some kind of document. I mean, what kind of forged document could he have been using in a deli? So someone else's EBT card, maybe, something like that. Even if that's the case, the death penalty is not a proportionate response. But now new details are coming out that the cop that killed him, they worked together as security in a nightclub on the same shifts. So, it sounds to me like that whole story is probably just a cover story, and there's something deeper going on here. Maybe this is more personal. But I guess, maybe we'll find out, maybe we won't. But, all of the information is filtered through the police lens, so we may never know the truth. Hopefully, citizen journalists will dig into it and expose the truth despite what the police try to cover up and the excuses that they make. But that may never happen. And I think in most cases, it never happens. In most cases, the truth never comes to light. Once in a while, we get a story like this that blows up in the media, and so it brings attention to it. And I think a lot of, probably the majority of people, and I don't want to say just white people, because there are a lot of people of color that will also take the side of the police, I think they tend to just think that, oh, it only happens once in a while. This happens every day. And we need to face the facts that this happens every single day. And that doesn't mean necessarily that people are being murdered every day, although that happens as well. But people are being falsely imprisoned, set up for drugs, all of this stuff. But the police would not be able to get away with any of it if the 70%, if the Make America Great crowd was as willing to stand up for the civil liberties of poor people of color, especially, as they are for storming a Capitol armed to protest the lockdown, which honestly, I support. I'm all for that because I don't believe we should tolerate any government tyranny. And if you want to stay home, stay home. If you want to open up your business and take that risk, that's your right. And if a customer wants to come to your business despite the risk, that's their right. So I'm all for ending the lockdowns, and I'm not bashing those protests, but we need to then say the other side protesting is legitimate as well. And I think that all of society, there is no innocent bystander here. So all these businesses that are being burned to the ground, and I'm not saying I support property destruction. I guess I'm just saying I'm not willing to judge or condemn, right? Because maybe some of these businesses being burned down treated these customers like second-class citizens, followed them around the store, and so the anger is now being directed at them too. Maybe not. I don't know. Maybe it's just the mob mentality takes over.
Let me stop you there for a second, okay?
Yeah.
I'm sure you remember when I was on the board of, on a lot of boards at Staten Island Board of Realtors. You were one of the people I used to call and vent to. Because I can't sell the house to my client because my client is black. My wife and I personally, a lesbian couple, walked into a particular area in Staten Island behind a big church. You already know where I'm talking about, on Forest Avenue, where all Irish people live. And I'm thinking, because my wife is a doctor and I'm a real estate broker, I own my own office, people know me. Oh my God, we got the house. We gave them full price, they accepted the price, and then they changed their minds. So are you now saying, if for those that support burning down, then I should go and burn down Staten Island Board of Realtors, I should burn down the builder's home and his businesses? I don't think that's the way to go, but let me just put us on pause on that for a moment, because if we're talking about diversity and inclusion, it's diversity and inclusion for everybody. But the truth is, until we start having this kind of conversations with each other, so that Black people and all people see that there are people on the other side that are allies. So instead of generalizing, we need to start to make personal connections out there. Because there's a lot more. I was on the internet searching, and there was a lot of non-Black voices out there screaming, this is not right. It's been going on too long. And I think the fear that when people say something, like my voice is the only voice saying, I don't think they should be burning buildings on social media, in my sphere. Everybody else is saying yay to this, and I don't understand that at all. But let me take a question real quick, and then we'll get to Mike. Anika Smith says, why aren't we going after the paramedics? They walked up, made no attempt to get the cup off Floyd's neck. What are we, I bet she meant, why are we just focused on the police? I don't know.
Can I take this, please?
Go ahead.
Sorry. I think that to blame an individual like a paramedic for not getting involved when they could get shot by the police is unfair. But when and I agree with what you're saying. I don't think we should burn individuals, and it's such a complex topic. But at the same time, we have a collective responsibility. One paramedic is not going to be able to stop the cops from murdering people, but the whole community stepping in, then we have power. And then if we zoom out even further, the whole country, if the 70% white people in this country stood up and said, this is unacceptable. And, we can blame Trump all we want, but Obama didn't do anything to stop killer cops either. And there's plenty of proof of that. And you know what? I think in some ways we can be thankful that Trump has encouraged all these racists to come out of the closet, because now we know who they are, we can face it, and we're having these conversations to a greater depth because it's so much more in our face. It's forcing white liberals especially to face this topic. And, as what happened with, I'm sorry, I don't remember his name, the bird watcher in Central Park, and this Karen that called the police on him, she's a white liberal. And she made a very clear and obvious threat based on his skin color. So,
but Mike, as an attorney, the Cooper, the lady that called the cops and was recorded, one of the things that she did, that the only thing actually that got her in big trouble, was the fact that she said she's calling the police and telling them that a black man was threatening her because she knew that her white privilege, when she calls the police, will get them motivated. In instances like that, what do you think the police department need to do to minimize those kind of phone calls? Because it's not the first time.
So I think I read somewhere that there was some discussion of whether the police were wondering if there was something they could charge that woman for, which I don't know the specifics of New York law on that, but I know in Connecticut, if a motivated prosecutor or police department can find something to charge. I mean, I see my clients get charged with handfuls of things, overcharged in cases all the time. They could find something to charge someone with, but I don't know that necessarily. It's difficult too, and this might be a little bit changing the question, but it's difficult for me as a criminal defense attorney that thinks that mass incarceration is destroying this country and all those things, to get up here and say the solution is to charge more white people with crimes and put more white people in prison, when I think that the solution to a lot of this stuff is much more complicated than that. But I'm sure that there are charges that you could charge that woman with. And I mean, that incident itself is just, the tone of her voice as she kicks into that mode is just a very disturbing thing. And I think I saw, just taking back to George Floyd, I think former NBA basketball player Steven Jackson said this yesterday, you can see the look on the officer's face. And that's the look of someone that knows that they're not going to be, or believes they won't be held accountable. And they know that they have basically a license to treat people that way. And that's the issue of accountability needing to come from somewhere to people who are doing these state-sponsored violence against people, to understand that there is going to be accountability. There can be accountability. And how those things manifest themselves, whether it's burning things down and all those things, it's obviously complicated. I don't think anyone's saying that people deserve to lose their businesses, or that people, innocent bystanders, deserve to be harmed. But the idea that there's some other channel that's obviously available to people that have been harmed it's just not the case, And I see this question pop up. I mean, first of all, I'm sure many of these businesses have insurance, and that's a good thing. And I have seen the communities working to clean up and help rebuild those things, and I believe that's going to happen. But the idea that there's some other outlet that people have just forgotten about, where they can find justice and find a solution to this, is bullshit. It really is. And I don't know if I'm allowed to swear on here, but it's nonsense. The idea that they just forgot some other pathway to get justice in our society, and that they should be using that, is nonsense. And I'm sad for any business owner that was harmed, or anyone that was harmed. But I'm not that sad, to be quite honest, because those, you can rebuild a business, you can replace property. You cannot replace a black life that has been stolen by police brutality, and it keeps happening. Like, I'm sorry, like, it just that doesn't break my heart the same way when I see Target with some spray paint and people taking things. And you can say whatever you want about whatever you want, but it doesn't break my heart the same way, and it's just not the issue. And that's basically how I feel about that. So
you and Danny totally agree. So it's a great team. But let me ask you a question, because let's go back to systematic racism, which includes incarceration of blacks and minorities in the U.S. and how how minorities are charged. I'm a person that comes from a Buddhist background, so I'm always looking for solutions, not always addressing the problem. We've been talking about the same issues for so many years. Where do we go from here is my question. One of the things I often tell my friends is, in Africa, we're raised a particular way. In America, the children have rights. So there's a lot that you can't do. You can't lock up your 16-year-old child in the house. They'll call the cops and imprisonment of some sort, whatever. So how do we avoid so many Black young boys and men going to jail? Because that's a huge piece. Anyone can take that.
I can touch on it a little bit from my experience. And, I've seen, one thing that strikes my mind is a judge that I dealt with who I actually respect. But, being presented with a set of facts that was really, horrible, where my client had, a lot of mitigation and things to on his side. And he said to me, Attorney Brown, I'm a judge. I send people to jail. That's what I do. And, when you get to that place where, our society funnels all its problems into the court system, into incarceration. And that's part of what's so depressing about the work that I do, is that by the time I get involved with something, there's already, disaster and all those things, right? So, our society has made a decision that the way to resolve many of the problems that are very deep is to incarcerate them. And, there's a million things that go into that. And I could spend days answering that question, but you see it piece by piece that's what we do in society when we have problems. And saw it with the opiate epidemic where, I have a client who's white, who's privileged, and he's an addict and he has a disease. I have a Black or brown client who commits a crime because he's a heroin addict, and it's prison and you go to jail. And that's just one example of it, but that's like our system in a nutshell, And again, kind of going back to this, like we talk about this cop being charged, and that is a good thing, but I believe that even he should be treated fairly and justly in the system. Maybe he should burn in hell in the next life, but in this world, he should receive fair and, equal injustice. He deserves justice too. And I know that that's like kind of a complicated concept to talk about, but, if I could jump into a question someone asked about third-degree murder, I went to law school in Minnesota, but I'm not an expert on Minnesota law. But looking at the statute, a typical first-degree murder would, I think, require the police to say they identified this man, said they wanted to kill him, and they killed him. And I don't know that could be proven, honestly. So if you look at the third-degree statute, I think it does make sense in some ways to say they acted in a way that was obviously going to cause extreme harm and possible death. So I think that makes sense. And I think, I don't agree with that prosecutor, what he was saying. I don't like that prosecutor. I'm not taking his side, but I do understand the idea that you have to charge people with things that you can prove. And it might be difficult to prove an intentional goal of hunting this man down and killing him. So, that's my answer to that.
Kevin White, a very good friend of mine, says Black people don't commit more crime. Black people are arrested and convicted more. Big difference. Danny, do you?
Of course. Yeah. Look, I know people on Staten Island that are some of the biggest cocaine dealers, but they're white and they come from privileged families. And so they don't go to jail. But the street dealer who they're supplying the drugs to, they get arrested. They get arrested. They serve a year or two. They come back out. They have no job opportunities. They go back to selling.
Their whole life is destroyed.
And then that's the prison pipeline, right? But, Martin Scorsese's nephew can deal drugs, and that's no problem.
Yeah. I totally
a lot of the white people that are looting in this country, they're called hedge fund managers. So, it's a little different, I guess.
But it's not different. And that's the problem, is that our society will tolerate that kind of theft from the powers that be, from Trump, Biden, Hillary Clinton. They're all crony capitalists. They all steal. They just gave trillions of dollars to the top corporations while they threw Americans $1,200 of our own money back. And this is I'm speechless. Like, it just, the frustration of this, but voters, anyone who votes tolerates this. Moji, this is where we disagree. You think voting didn't stop the murder of George Floyd. Murder doesn't stop. Voting doesn't stop any of this. Kneeling didn't stop it. Speaking nicely didn't stop it. Peaceful protest didn't stop it. So is it a surprise that people want to riot now?
I totally believe me. I totally get it. You're speaking to a Nigerian woman, right? You're not speaking to you're speaking to a Nigerian woman. I come from a country where if you say call your dog if you name your dog the name of the president, you're going to jail. I come from a country where you can buy yourself out of anything. I come from a country where Moji, am considered a criminal for being a lesbian woman. So I get all of that. But here's the thing. Solutions, or something to try that's different is what I believe in. So we know what the problem is. Clinton, I've been in this country for so long that I've been through how many different presidents, and nothing's changing. I mean, it's a very slow wheel. So I say, let's take it grassroots, right? Mm-hmm. I know Danny. Danny's married to Vanessa, who's Mexican. I know Mr. Brown, Mike Brown, who's married to my friend, a Nigerian woman. How do we now take this out into the community? How do we get people to get to know each other? So when they see a black man coming, they don't run. I said something on my show the other day. I had to take a look at myself first before I started to look outside and ask myself, what are the unconscious biases that I have because of the experiences that I have had in my life, right? And for most people, most white people, I can't say all, but for most white people that have not experienced another black person, all they know is what they've seen on television. All they know is what they've heard from their parents or their grandparents who came from a different era. Our son and I sat in the dining table last night. He's 16 years old. He goes to a school where it's all mixed people, and he's in a boarding school where everybody watches out for everybody. It's an international boarding school. And he says to me, Mom, people are talking about white people this, white people that on social media, and I'm fighting my black friends to protect my white friends. And I said to him, you know what? Tell your white friends to start speaking up when they see something wrong, because that's the only way to go. And Danny's on my page. I've been saying that for many years. I posted something the other day about how disappointed I am that my white friends are not saying anything on their pages, but they'll come to mine and say something. But the people you need to speak to are on your pages. So how do we get the message of inclusion and diversity out to the 70%?
I think it's a matter of having the difficult conversations. I mean, Danny and I have an interracial relationship. We've had very uncomfortable dinners, Sunday dinners, with some of his family members, and it's about calling them out and speaking up. It's difficult. It's really uncomfortable. I hate going to Sunday dinner because I know it's going to turn into some sort of argument related to race, and it's really uncomfortable. I can't argue with Danny's dad about his beliefs, but Danny can. So Danny has to speak up and say, hey, you're wrong. I know Vanessa. I know her life. I know her friends and family. I know the community that she's from. These ideas that you have that you got from Fox News are not accurate. You don't know her friends, her family, her community. You don't know what they're doing. And it's a matter of us doing our internal work. We live in a very colonized society with a colonized mentality. And we are stuck in these beliefs that we have to fix the system, but the system was never designed to benefit minorities. So we can't fix a system that was built a certain way. What we can do is create a new system. We have to take back our power. We have to realize that we are already sovereign beings, and that's work that we have to do to start undoing all of these ideas that we have, all of these insecurities, all of these victim mentalities that we have, and take charge of our own lives. We take charge of our own health.
Hold on 1 second. Let me put you on pause. Repeat that part about the victim mentality.
We have to let go of that victim mentality, because the more we believe that we are victims, the more we will act like victims, the more we will fall into the same traps over and over again. Once we realize that we're sovereign beings, what we're going to do is we're going to take control of our health. I mean, we are relying on a system that for ages has not benefited us. I mean, look at the Tuskegee syphilis trials. Look at the mass sterilization of minority women in the 70s. I mean, when has the medical industry benefited minorities? We need to take control of our health again. We need to take control of our communities. We need to create community gardens where people are, building sustainable alternatives to be able to provide organic food for our community so we can be healthier. Like, we need to pay attention when something is posted on the internet. We need to do our own fact checking. We need to take the responsibility of our lives instead of relying on the government to say, all right, you're free now, or you have rights now. They don't give us the rights. We are born with those rights. And we keep thinking that we have to ask for them. And that's what causes us to be on this hamster wheel of like, oh, now we have to do something to see if they'll give us the rights. We're the majority. The government and the police departments are all the minority. So why are we still asking them to give us permission to live our lives?
See, I really appreciate that comment, because that's what I've been saying for 10 years. I butt heads with your husband all the time on social media.
But I don't disagree with that.
One of the things that I strongly believe in, Mike, and I'll bring Mike in a moment, is that unfortunately for a lot of a lot of Black Americans, unlike the African Americans that come from somewhere and they come here because where they were is no longer, or never worked for them, is no longer working for them. So we have an idea that there's something better out there, and we came here searching for it. The Black Americans have been here. They've been told they're not good. They've been told they're not going to make something of themselves. They've been told a lot of things subliminally that they now, they now believe it. Mm-hmm. So they work from that place subconsciously. And I'll tell you a short story. I mentor a lot of Black American kids, right? And when I tell them, I'm a 55-year-old woman recreating myself. I decided to learn to sew like your wife, and I'm doing different things. I'm taking a lot of classes online. When I speak to my mentees and I tell them, oh, you should take this class, take that class. A lot of the classes I take is just for my own knowledge, because the more you know, the more educated you are. And I don't mean the many degrees that you have, but the more educated you are, the more your mind opens. Until we are able to, until all society is able to encourage Black Americans, it's going to be difficult for them to see themselves. I wake up in the morning going, oh, today I'm going to I'm doing. A lot of them don't think they have that chance or choice. Mike, would you please take the same question if you remember?
Yeah, so I don't know if pushing back is the right way to describe it, but this is a conversation I've had with Candy many times, and she's evolved in her thinking based on us talking about it. But I think it's difficult for people to understand that weren't maybe necessarily born here I'm just talking based upon, I know it's outsider knowledge for me, but the level of intergenerational trauma that African Americans have in this country, I would just push back against the idea that there's some merely psychological limit that they've put on themselves, that if they just realize that they have worth, they're going to be able to do better. I think that is an oversimplification. I mean, our education system in inner cities where many people are is a disaster for a lot of people. And that's not by accident, we can go down the line of a lot of things. And certainly the process involves what you're talking about, but it's difficult to just say if people just were a little bit more enlightened about things would be different. And we can see the outliers. People overcome that. People get through those things, but that doesn't mean that just anyone who pulls themselves up by their bootstraps is gonna get to that place. That's my belief, at least. And some of that stuff is, and it goes to a lot of the questions that I'm seeing on here, like, mass incarceration, the effect that has on families and people growing up without fathers in these communities. It's difficult to just say if they just realize their own worth, that would be different. I mean, these things are deeply ingrained in our society, and these conversations are important, but and our hearts and our minds, it's important to change those. But the system that we have is so deeply ingrained in a racist, problematic form. And one thing too, and this goes back to what Vanessa was just saying that I agree with, if we're going to burn it all down, which we can disagree about whether we need to burn it all down or not, but we can't burn down the prisons that we have just to build new prisons with different structures. And I think part of what's difficult for white Americans is we live in a society that's based on white supremacy, based on over-policing, brutal policing, based on mass incarceration. So when you talk about justice, a lot of times you just think about flipping that around to someone else being the one that's doing harm to someone else, and that's scary, and that's the only way a lot of white Americans can imagine justice. But if we burn it all down and rebuild it with, true justice and equality for Black people, brown people, transgender people, gay and lesbian people, and economic justice, we don't have to build a new system based on incarceration, based on policing. And that's, people get shocked, but you can imagine a world without heavily armed police. Like, we assume that has to happen, but that's just because we've been living in this frame for so long that people are afraid to even imagine a life or a world that doesn't involve a militarized police. So I'm sorry to turn that into a rant, but I think
no, okay. Let's take a question from Mike.
That's how I see it. So, okay.
Okay, this one says, Mike or Danny, is it a technique of kneeling on someone's neck a taught police technique, or is it illegal? That I'm not a lawyer, but
I don't think it matters whether it's illegal or not, because there's a lot of immoral things that the police do legally. So the question is it moral? A man who's already restrained, who's not a threat, has 5 policemen standing around him, there's no reason to also lean on his neck. If you felt you absolutely had to, 2 cops could get around him and just make sure that he's not going to move without putting pressure on his neck, which stops him from breathing. So whether it's legal or not is really irrelevant. It's completely immoral, and it cannot be tolerated. The white majority needs to stand up and say, we will not tolerate this anymore. And that's it. That's the only way this ends. This is a democratic society where we believe that the majority opinion is right. And that's not true at all. There's nothing moral about democracy. 51% voting to force their will on 49%. That's how we got institutionalized patriarchy, misogyny, homophobia, racism. Democracy is the vehicle that those things ride in. So we need to burn this system down and start new.
Not burn the buildings down.
We made the comment before. What do I say to the Black business owner who got his? It's a terrible. I hate to call it collateral damage because that sounds like I'm dismissing it, because I'm not. On an individual level, people are going to suffer. Revolution is messy, and it's going to get hard. It's going to get worse, but we have to go through that pain to get to the other side of building a new society where none of these things exist anymore, or where they're greatly reduced.
Let me tell you something. I beg to differ, though, because I don't think racism will ever go away. If Africans have tribalism in Africa and there's colorism in Africa, there's no way racism will ever go away. Sure. But what we all have to learn to do is to live, together, because nobody's moving to Mars.
Well, I think that we can differentiate between, maybe call it small r racism and big R racism. Racism that's structurally ingrained in the way our society works is different than people having a suspicious eye or maybe implicit biases about the way they, interpret a situation. And I think that there is a difference, and we can't have a society that's not built on structural racism at a minimum. And I do believe that a better world is possible where we get past some of that small r racism, but that's just my 2 cents on that.
Kevin White says, Kevin and Danny must be best friends. Kevin says, a large part of the problem has been the militarization of the police. Put people in combat gear, they want to do combat. So what do you say to that, Mike?
I mean, absolutely. And someone else said something about the union offering the warrior training for free. And I am a progressive person. I believe in workers' rights and unions, but police unions are one of the most destructive forces in American society right now, and they honestly should be abolished. And getting beside that, the idea of the militarization of the police is one of the most troubling thing that's happened. And it's the people that you're feeding into that militarized system. I mean, white supremacist groups, people like that are being members of that. It's a very, extremely troubling situation. So
Annika Smith's comment is going to lead me to something else that I would like you guys to touch on. Annika Smith says, so we're saying we should excuse crime in Black people because white people commit crimes too. Who wants to take that?
Answer that, but so I could use an example. I don't know if everyone remembers the Brock Turner case from a few years ago, where there was a sexual assault on campus, and that young man was given a lenient sentence. And I was troubled to hear the framing that people engaged in with that, with basically, they would take examples of similar situations where a Black man got 20 years in prison, and the solution in people's minds was give Brock Turner 20 years in prison, when we really need to start thinking about why judges aren't individualized, looking at individuals and their ability to reform, whether they deserve another chance, whether there's an alternative to incarceration for everyone. And we see the same thing happening now with Paul Manafort being released from prison because of the COVID-19 stuff. And our reaction is, that's terrible because other people aren't being released, when I think we should be thinking about everyone should be treated in a just and fair way with less incarceration and all those things. So getting to that question, I don't think anyone is saying excusing crime in anyone, but it's, imagining the same, forgiving eye being applied to all people that we apply to, privileged, rich white people that find themselves in the criminal justice system. And so, I think that's where it starts. That's what I believe.
That apply to privileged Black people as well? Because if you talk about privilege in my country, Nigeria, if you have money, you can get away with murder. Now, in America, I don't know how it works. Does that apply to privileged Black people as well?
I think it absolutely is the way it works in our society. I mean, we're also, primarily capitalist society. I mean, we see O.J. Simpson. There's other examples out there, of course. But you look at the statistics of, and even if it is just an economic thing, then we need economic justice. But if you look at the numbers proportionally of Black men going to prison and being incarcerated, it can't be explained by the amount of crime that's being committed. So I don't think anyone's trying to justify. Hi, Mom, by the way. I see that she just.
But
that distracted me. So
I'm doing a show with you next week. So this is not your week. This is Mike's week. Next week you can come on, please. So, anyways, let's get to a few more questions because we're running out of time. One of the most important questions that I had for all three of you today is a very dear friend of mine that I've known for about 12, 13 years. A few years ago, her son was murdered by an African-American person. And yesterday, while this madness was going on and everybody was shouting, the noise in the marketplace was so loud, he actually had a meltdown. And she posted, I guess I should go and burn Atlantic City because my son was killed by a Black person and Black people did not care. Nobody marched, nobody said anything. So I guess we all, anytime, and I also posted yesterday, every time a Black person gets raped by a Black person, we have to go and march because I believe in inclusion and diversity. But I see you shaking your head. But how do you tell a mother that lost her son at the hands of an African-American person and the community did not stand up for her? What do you say to that person?
I don't know the facts of that case, and it's obviously terrible and tragic, and there's nothing that can be said to justify or minimize that. However, what people are angry about is the lack of consequence or accountability that people in power believe they can exercise with impunity against black and brown people, and many white people too, that are victimized at the hands of police. And when a black person kills another black person, or a black person kills anyone, our society has shown that they're more than willing to indict them, incarcerate them, and often never let them out again. So the outrage, in my view at least, and again, I'm not even saying we should burn, shouldn't burn, but the outrage is that there doesn't seem to be any accountability or consequence for the people in power. And if this rioting and burning is justified, it's because it serves as a reminder to the people in power that there are limits on the amount of oppression and abuse that the people are willing to take. And I know we're not here to say whether it's right or wrong, but that's the purpose behind the burning and the rioting. It's not to steal, it's not to loot, it's to show that there is a limit that people will accept before they say enough is enough. And whether it's through the ballot box or someplace else, sometimes people feel like they need to remind those in power that it's not limitless. So
Margaret says, I agree with Vanessa. The problem is the false construct. Communities and culture should not be defined by skin color. We will never be unified if we look to skin color, hair color, or eye color as a common bond. I learned that the hard way. I'm going to take this for a second. I absolutely agree, and Margaret is my wife, so I is going with this. And I know this is directed at me, so I'll take it. For a long time, because I grew up outside Nigeria, I was very hungry to connect with my people, right? The most pain I've ever felt in my life has come from Nigerian men because of patriarchy. Then you add in the tribalism, then you add in the fact that I'm LGBTQ. Along the way, I learned not to look at people for their color, for where they come from, but as to the quality and their integrity, as well as their character. And it's very hard to get to that point until one has gotten to a place of, until I just lost you guys, give me a second, until one has gotten to a place, can you help me with this? There you go. Until one has gotten to a place where your pain has made you look at yourself. That's where transformation comes in. Now, nobody goes through a transformation without, like they say in church, not that I go to one, but there's no transformation, there's no resurrection without a death.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we're at the point in America right now where we're at a point where we have to start to transform from where we were before. Transformation only happens, Moji, believe, when we start to think about solutions. We start to try to evolve by being open-minded and unlearning a lot of the things that we've learned. And if we say, let's see, there was something I saw up here. Mikey, I had to put that up. But anyway, so, and Miss Gloria Brown, Shuku to you. Shuku is like a high five in Yoruba culture. Shuku to you for raising such an amazing human being. Thank you so much for the hard work you did. And you too, Mike. Anyways, I had to. So, Udosen Emmanuel, oh my God, you're about to blow up this show. Oh, Lord have mercy. Udosen Emmanuel says, I don't blame the whites for the discriminations immigrants blacks face. They have a better society. I blame the government of the blacks for exoduces. If our society
exoduses.
He just knocked it right out. Who would want to migrate to developed countries for greener pastures? Shuku to you. Thank you so much for bringing that. I was trying to bring it up, but I was being politically correct. Thank you for pushing the envelope this time.
I'd also like to add to that comment that sometimes they're fleeing from what the U.S. is doing to their countries. Bombs were dropping, economic sanctions that cause poverty. So Sometimes you're fleeing to get into the enemy's backyard so that you can be safe.
Right now, I need you to get a cup of water and drink it or something. Because I don't know to go here, but let's go there. Thank you, Mr. Emmanuel, for bringing that up. Let me give you my walk, not anybody else's walk, right? I am from a country, Nigeria, that was created by the Brits. They colonized us, right? They brought electric, they brought water, they brought this, they brought that. When I grew up I was born in 1964. I left Nigeria in 1982 or something like that, right? I lived in a country, Nigeria, right? Nigeria is no longer Nigeria. Now I call it Nigeria because that's an illusion. In Nigeria, when the Brits were there, we had running water, we had electric, we had security, we had everything. So colonization is not always a bad thing. When they landed and when they left and handed it to Nigerians, Nigerians destroyed the country. Nigerians raped the country. Nigerians stole money from the country. Nigerians are still selling their own people. The cell phone that you guys have, we have in America for $50 a month or whatever you pay for your, Nigerians are paying almost $300 a month for. And Naira, when I left, was 2 Naira to $1. Now it's 375 Naira to $1. So it's not always the, and then when we talk about slavery, this is not the show. When we talk about slavery, somebody on my show yesterday, on my timeline yesterday said, oh yeah, and they sold us to the white people. Honey, I took classes, I spoke to my father, I spoke to my grandparents, I called my uncle's uncle years ago when I started this journey of transformation for Moji. What I learned is that many Africans sold their brothers and sisters into slavery. So when we go back, when we talk about African and the problems we have in Africa that's making people willing to lose their lives and go through Libya, where they're enslaved in 2020 to get to the promised land, it's not always the problem of the white people because things happen. It's time we Black people own our own shit.
There's personal responsibility involved in all areas. To say that one person is the victim of everybody else is to negate our own responsibility, like we were talking about before. And I agree with what you were saying, Mike, before about the system just kind of being stacked against minorities, you know, with education, with healthcare, with mass incarceration. There's all of that exists, and it's true. And that's what I mean about us not looking to the system to help us get out of where we are. We need to create stronger communities. We need to connect with our neighbors. We need to talk to people who are like-minded, who are willing to do the work, looking at ourselves to see, where are my beliefs? What are my beliefs pushing me to do? And yeah, that means that that we need to learn how to exercise our Second Amendment right, learn how to work together in communities to defend ourselves and defend each other, help each other grow spiritually, emotionally, create that emotional intelligence, work through the generational trauma that we've been carrying. I mean, I've been on this path for years, and every day I discover a new thing that doesn't belong to me. That's just something that has been passed on to me from my parents, my grandparents, and these beliefs that aren't true. And it's a lot of work, and a lot of us want to just find a quick fix solution. Let's vote somebody in to fix everything, and then we don't have to do anything. But we have major responsibilities. We have the responsibility to educate our children. It's exhausting. You know, it's exhausting to have to educate your kids. My parents both worked, and in the evenings, my dad would ask, what did you learn today? And is that the story that you believe? Do you think that really happened? Or is that the story that they want you to know? And I'd be like, what is he talking about? This man is crazy. But he would make me look into stories. And I was like, he's exhausted too, but that was his responsibility. It's exhausting, it's hard work, but we have that responsibility. And that's the only way we're going to liberate ourselves.
Let me just go, let me rewind your comment a little bit. Back to being accountability. Taking individual activism is what I've preached for many, many years, which is learn how to teach yourself something different. Because what a lot of people have been taught is history. History is not always our story. So when you learn your story, it kind of helps to define yourself and helps you to recognize your identity.
Mm-hmm.
Part of the problem, I don't know, about a lot of African Americans that I've spoken to is a lot don't know where they came from, who they are, their grandparents and all that. But okay, I give everybody, there's no excuses. But let's take the part about healing. I started going to therapy about 20 years ago, and all my friends were laughing. Oh my God, that's for white people, you know, and that's white people thing. But I came from a home with 12 stepmothers and 26 brothers and sisters. with no mother in the house. That's a lot of trauma. A lot of us have gone through a lot of trauma, and a part of the healing for this whole country is that African Americans have to recognize that they had trauma and they continuously go through trauma. I don't allow our son to watch TV because every day you turn on the TV, there's no TV ever running out in the house unless we're watching something, a movie or something. Because every day on the news, they're telling Black people, you're worthless, you're a thief, you're this, you're that. Every day. One of the things that I learned was affirmations. I wake up in the morning, you see me, I meditate, and I tell myself, you're beautiful, you're worthy, you're worthwhile. If we start to open the doors of communications with each other, and we have to, I think, if we try to unlearn what we've been told, and that's the hardest part, isn't it? How do we promote education? And I don't mean going to school alone, in our communities, coming from you guys. Mike, please go first.
What? Sorry, just lost and thinking about what's the actual question there. Sorry, there was a lot you said.
How do we promote healing? How do we promote?
So and I think that, again, I keep saying it's complicated because it's hard to give an answer to that, and certainly there is individual responsibility. Nothing I'm saying about the structures that exist in our society are to say that people don't have any accountability for their own decisions and actions. But promoting that individual, if someone's born into, you take some of the individuals that I come in contact with and you say, where are they supposed to take all this self-discovery from, right? They're broken homes that they live in.
Yeah.
They have generations of poverty and incarceration and drug abuse and all those things. And they go to a school that's not going to teach them that. And there's all those places that, and if they want to take that initiative to do something better and do something different, they might be limited by, the availability of resources and all those things. So it's difficult to say that one person can make that change. And certainly there's always people that step outside of those circumstances. But I just feel very hesitant to say it's on the individual who's being traumatized to overcome what's being done to them. But I don't know if that ever gets you to the solution either, because, we keep waiting on people to change or the systems to change, and that doesn't happen either. So I'm sort of lost for words to say where it starts. These conversations help, but unfortunately, there's people that I know and I have friendships with, care about, in my middle-class upbringing, that when Donald Trump came to the forefront, they went down that road of accepting what Donald Trump was saying. And I personally feel like I failed somewhat, because instead of going to their house and trying to convince them that they're wrong, I've just cut them off. And I guess I have the privilege of doing that in my life, to say, I'm not going to deal with you if you don't care about that. So we have this rift of things that's happened in society. And I think some of us have sort of just decided that there's a certain element of people that are just not going to get it. And I don't think that that's the solution, but it's really hard to not give into that, So again, I'm lost for words, because it's just so painful that we don't ever seem to get to the next step of this stuff, and then,
all right. We're coming very close on time. We've got about 10 more minutes. Can we please, let's take Femi Babalola's comment. I understand the sympathy and outpouring of emotions, but not this. There is no excuse for these behaviors from these people who otherwise don't really care for this deceased, but have used the situation to serve their own selfish agenda. That's heavy. Who wants to take that one?
Does Femi mean the people are the looters, being selfish? They don't really care that George Floyd was killed, but they're just using it as an excuse? Because there probably is some of that in there. I think the problem is with judgment, and
I think it means white America. If I'm reading his post, Femi, please make a comment and let us know what you mean. Okay.
In the meantime, I guess I would like to go back to the previous question, and how do we educate people? I think we can only educate the people that we have close relationships with. Work on your immediate circle. That's where you can be the most effective. And yeah, I think in some ways Mike is right. It is kind of like having the privilege to cut off, our racist friends rather than try and use empathy. And we can use empathy. Daryl Davis is a jazz musician, a black jazz musician who used empathy to get 150 Klan members. These were casual racists who, a white friend who makes a racist joke. These were committed racists, burning crosses, with wearing hoods. He got 150 of them to realize blacks are humans too, and they gave him their hoods. So if he can do that, we can empathize with Trump supporters and try to use compassion to get through to them, because people don't care what you know until they know you care. So when you use empathy to create a rapport, then you can hopefully deliver the message, and they may not all accept it. And then at some point, if they continue with their hate, you can cut them off. I mean, you can set boundaries, healthy boundaries too. That doesn't mean you should just absorb everybody's toxicity.
Exactly.
But I think that goes along with your message of personal growth, Moji.
So are we all agreeing that the best way to work towards a better future is for each and every one of us to become socially accountable, number one, to be bystander, to be a bystander that gets involved in what's going on around them. When you see something, say something. Is it fair to ask all people, African Americans, Black Americans, and all white and all the different shades of colors in between, to get to know somebody different from them? Because
when you see something, just don't call police. Don't say something to police. Say something to what's actually happening.
Exactly. And don't, what I find a lot, and this breaks my heart in Africa, you'll see a man being lynched, and instead of saying something, people will whip out their phones and take, videos so that they can trend on social media. So I think, what would you say as a takeaway from this show? What would you want people to take away from this show? Honestly, just 3 things, each person, that can help us to get past this point.
You go first.
Danny, you go.
I would say, for me, it just comes down to one thing: empathy. Empathize with everybody. Empathize with oppressed minorities. Empathize with the oppressors who are so fearful of losing control that's why they feel like they need to dominate. That doesn't mean we accept the oppression, but we can empathize with the reasons why they feel they need to oppress, and then hopefully reach them and let them know why they don't have to oppress, or why it's immoral to oppress. So I would say empathy is probably really the core of it.
Empathy from the majority, which are the white people. Is that what you're saying?
Empathy from everybody. Empathy from all sides.
I like clarity. Okay, fantastic. And Mike?
I guess just kind of going along with that, it's just a takeaway for me personally, is to be persistent in the pursuit of justice, even if it's frustrating, if it's depressing, or it's painful. And sometimes we, who are privileged, can kind of check out of this like really difficult process and say, I'm doing enough because I do X, Y, and Z, but that we need to stay vigilant and stay working towards that better world that is possible through hard work and, some discomfort that's going to be part of the process. So that's my takeaway.
I'm going to read Mrs. Brown's comment, which is, when I was a teacher, I would have white students tell me, we like the Black kids, we are nice to them. I would ask them, have you ever invited them to your house? Mrs. Brown, thank you. Ever invited them to a sleepover? The only way we can make real change is person to person. I was never a prejudiced or racist person, but my thinking has changed so much since Mike married Candy. It's real for me now. Mommy, shukukiyuma.
Can I just say that I have had the same experience? Moji, would you have ever thought that I was a racist person?
No.
I mean, all white people have a little bit, right? But when I married Vanessa, it took years of hard work of us dialoguing about this for me to let go of a lot of racist ideas that I did have inside that I didn't even realize. So when it becomes personal, you know, Mike's mom and wife developing a personal relationship, and I mean, that's why I said, if you can empathize and kind of form connections with people like Daryl Davis did with the Klan members, that's what breaks down those barriers. So even people who maybe weren't overtly racist or big R racist can start to let go of some of these internalized white supremacist beliefs that we don't even realize are in there. So
Yeah.
thank you for having the patience to educate me.
I can't tell you how grateful I am that you guys accepted the invitation to come to this show. One of the things that a lot of us are trying to work on is when I met my wife, I was trying to save the world, right? And I would be exhausted and tired. And I remember her saying to me one day when I was sobbing, after I was shredded on social media, she said to me, you know, you can't boil the ocean, but you can boil the ocean one cup at a time. So if we all leave this conversation today, we're trying to boil the ocean one cup at a time, eventually a lot of the ocean will be boiled. So for me, I must tell you, I've learned a lot today from both Mike, Vanessa, and Danny as an African American woman, because as an African American woman, as an African American person in America, I am just so grateful to be here, and I can flip on my lights and the electric comes on, and I'm grateful for the free education, because in Nigeria, if you're poor, you're not getting anywhere. And I'm, you know, we because we are so grateful for so much, sometimes we don't see the problems or the issues. Because when I get discriminated against and I can't buy that house because they won't let me, I go someplace else and I buy the house, you know. Or when somebody affects me and tells me I can't do something because, you know, my skin people don't do it, I do it. You know, I make it my mission to go out there and do it. And I didn't realize the privilege, because there's white privilege, there's this privilege, there's men have a privilege because of misogyny and things like that. But there's also a privilege that Africans have, and that privilege is grit. It's you know, it's resilience, it's knowing who we are and such. So if we all work together as a community of people, not looking at each other as white, black, or green, and take me with my big mouth and say Muji has a big mouth, not that all Nigerians have a big mouth, and we stop stereotyping people and working on our personal unconscious biases, I really believe we'll get further in the journey to a better United States of America. But I thank you all so much for coming. It's been an amazing conversation. I hope we get to do this again. It's way past 1 o'clock. I don't want to tell you on a Saturday, so I say thank you for joining. All right.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much, you guys. Everybody else hanging there for a second. I want you guys to share this video. As you know, my mission is to help to heal the world and to create a better space for each and every one of us to live in, and to leave the world a little bit better than we came into it. It takes each and every one of us to make a difference. It's not just shouting and rioting and burning down buildings when something happens. We have to become proactive and not reactive. Let's start building each other up. Let's stop cutting each other up and start educating. Share your wisdom with somebody else. Uplift the next person. This is Mojisola Wilson, and I say thank you so much. And we're on YouTube, by the way. I was just told to mention that we're on YouTube. Go to YouTube, find us, share the video, spread the love, spread the word. Like my wife always says, we can't boil the ocean, but we can boil the ocean one cup at a time.